the goodies out. It's nice. Everybody's sitting front except for those people back in the sound booth. We'll pray for them. So, Pastor's son was graduating, and he said he was going to be out tonight, and if I had something to talk about, and you might have noticed I always have something to talk about, and I actually had to dig through because I had a couple of things I've been looking at, and you're trying to figure out which one I should talk about, maybe not wanted to, but should, and it always seems like the Lord puts a couple things together, or somebody says something, and it gets you moving, like you start chewing on it, and it's like, that's that point, that one of those points I was looking at, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, because I've been chewing it over, and I thought I'll share it with you guys. What I want to look at tonight is truth, okay? And this sort of springboards off of, Pastor had just done a whole series on worship, right? And he talked about what worship is. And I'm going to sort of flip that coin over tonight and sort of look at it on the backside a little bit, the other way. My wife, she's like the carrot. You know, she gets people moving with a carrot, the kids, I'm the stick. So I'm always the backside. So Pastor talked about what worship is. It must have been working around the back of my head what worship isn't. And somebody had mentioned to me, and you've probably heard one of these phrases before, I worship in my own way. Me and God have an understanding. And I always like that because they put me first. You know what I mean? And if you're talking about God, they'll say, oh no, we're good. As in, they're good with God. We're good. You've all heard those phrases before, right? And I was chewing this over, and one of those phrases got mentioned again. And I thought, I got to look at this a little more in depth. And I started out looking at the word worship, but it's quickly turned to the word truth, right? It's what somebody's truth is where they approach this worship from. I pulled this definition off of the internet because that's where you get some really good definitions, right? It says, for personal truth, this mindset is based on someone's, I put this in here. I'll read what I wrote and then I'll read what they wrote. This personal truth concept, this is based on someone's lack of understanding of reality. It comes from the mindset of, I know what is right for me, right? That's what we hear today. In other words, I know what I believe to be true for me, and the definition I pulled off online says, or how to find out what's true for you, right? Because we all should know how to find out what's true for us, right? Okay, so this is how the world says you should find your truth. It's a profound and transformative journey that requires self-reflection and introspection. It involves discovering and embracing who you truly are, there's that word truly, at your core, and living in alignment with that authenticity. Ooh, I like all the big words. That impressed me. It requires a willingness to listen to yourself, to be aware of your truth. There's that truth again. And to take action based on that truth. If you're counting, we're up to like 4 truths now, right? Ultimately, finding your truth, there's 5, is about living a life that is authentic to who you are. That should give us all a chuckle, because we should all know who we are. It means breaking free from the limitations of societal expectations and embracing your unique gifts and potential. It may involve letting go of relationships that no longer serve your growth and surrounding yourself with people who accept and support your truth, right? It says like 6 times, 7 times the word truth is in there. They really pounded on that word truth, right? But you notice how they told you to find that truth. You're to look in yourself, right? We as Christians know Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, who can know it? So as we as Christians look in ourselves to find our truth, what should we see? Or what should we understand? Looking in here is a bad place to look, right? When we do that, as these people do, and we look in there and we ignore the bad stuff, and we want to look for the good, right? we deceive ourselves, okay? When we start thinking, there's good in here, I'm okay, you're deceiving yourself. That should bring another verse to mind, right? 1 John 1:8. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Okay? We need to understand what we are if we're going to worship God in truth. Because when we don't know what we are and we try to worship God, we have a problem. And that's sort of what I wanted to look at tonight. What happens when we worship based on our own truth? Okay? Genesis 4:3 says, "And in the process of time it came to pass, Cain brought forth the fruit of the ground, an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." You know what Cain's problem was? He came to God and he worshiped God in his own truth. And in his truth, his works were good enough. He was saying to God, I don't need the sacrifice. Really, he was saying to God, I don't need your son to shed his blood and die for me. What I'm producing is good enough. When we look and we decide our truth is right, we run the risk of worshiping in our own works. And if you remember what happened to Cain after his countenance fell, he kills his brother. And then one of the saddest verses in the Bible, there's a bunch of them, but this one's right up there. It says he left the presence of the Lord. He took his family and he left the presence of God because he thought he could worship in his own works. He basically walked away from God and condemned himself and his family to hell. We can't do that as Christians. Leviticus 10:1 says, Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein and put incense thereon and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. They decided they were going to worship God in their own style, right? God had given here's what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to do it. And they were following through with everything else, right? They had the right clothes on, right? They had the priestly garments on. It says because they took them up in those garments after they got fried. They took them out. They had the right clothes on. They were doing it in the right time. They had the right censer. They had the right everything except for that fire, right? They offered the strange fire. Because they decided, well, we can do it in our way, right? Because in their truth, their style was more important than following God's exact word. God said, you'll do all the steps correctly. And they decided, well, we can give it our own little flair, okay? Didn't work. Numbers 16. Start out in verse 1. I'm going to skip through a couple of verses here. It says, Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Elib, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses, and certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, and every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. Now who lifted Moses up above the congregation of the Lord? That wasn't a position Moses said, ooh, pick me, pick me, pick me. That was a position Moses actually got in trouble with God because Moses was giving God all kinds of excuses that he didn't want to do it. And God said, you're doing it. In verse 16 it says, And Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron tomorrow. and take every man his censer. Oop, there's those censers again. And put, you think we'd learn, but we don't learn. And take every man his censer and put incense in them, and bring ye before the Lord every man his censer, 250 censers, because that's 250 princes and nobles. Thou also and Aaron, each of you his censer. And they took every man his censer, and put fire in them, and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. I often wonder if they got the right fire there. The Bible doesn't tell us, but I'll bet they did. And Korah gathered all the congregation again against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. Skip down to verse 28. It says, And Moses said, Hereby shall ye know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own hand. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth, and swallow them up, and all that appertain to them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand these men have provoked the Lord. Notice that. Their worship, Moses is calling this out. He's saying their worship is provoking the Lord. Okay, you've got 150 men there. They've got their censers. They got their fire on it on one side, and the other side you got Aaron standing there. And he was probably sweating bullets because he was, remember, making that golden calf, right? And maybe this was the time he was going to pay a penalty for that. There's 150 men standing there with censers before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. It says, And it came to pass, as he made an end of speaking all these words. So as soon as he's done talking, the ground clave asunder that was under them. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up and all their house, and all the men that appertained to Korah and all their goods. They and all that appertained unto them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. You know what these guys were doing? These guys decided that they could worship the Lord from their position, their authority. We're men of renown. We're princes of the congregation. What makes you, Aaron, think you're special? You, Moses, why do you think you're special? I'm a prince of the tribes of Israel. I'm a noble. I'm somebody important. Do you remember the king that decided he could go offer sacrifice on the altar and ended up with leprosy for life or to death, right? When we worship incorrectly, or we worship incorrectly when we go before God and think, God, I'm somebody, right? I'm an American. Or, I'm better than those people, or I have a good job, so therefore I can put it in a plate, right? When you have that attitude, you are not humble before the Lord. You're worshiping from a position of authority, from a position of power. God doesn't accept that. He specifically says he's looking to the meek, right? He's looking to the humble. He's not looking for that worship of, you don't know how good I am, God. I'm really somebody here. I could help the church from what, my job. No, it doesn't work, as those men found out. Here's a good one. 2 Samuel 6:2. It said, David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal, it's two A's, of Judah, to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwelleth between the cherubims. If you remember, the Israelites lost the ark in the battle that King Saul died in. The Philistines had it, and it got bounced around because God cursed them and smote them with plagues. So they finally loaded it up on a cart with two milk kine that needed milk, kept their calves at home, and said, if those two milk kine who never drew a cart before, if they take that back to Israel, then we know God was in it. But if they would do as they should have done, their milk cows who'd never had a cart tied to them before, they shouldn't have went anywhere. Or they tried the opposite direction. They shouldn't have gone anywhere. Instead, they walked straight back to Israel with that thing. And then the children of Israel looked in it. God smote them because they weren't supposed to look in it. And then it got stored at someone's house until David was king. And then David said, I want to bring it back to Jerusalem. This is when he starts to bring it back to Jerusalem. In the next verse it says, and they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Geba. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Geba, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error. And there he died by the ark of God. You know, God has a problem with our worship, even if we're worshiping in ignorance and we're doing it wrong. That ark was supposed to be carried in a specific way. If you remember, God gave commandments. We were actually coming through Exodus and we studied that, right? The priests were to bear it on poles, okay? What happened here? It's sort of what the church does today. We see something in the world and think, ooh, that's pretty cool, and we bring it into the church, right? Not thinking there's going to be a problem with it. But if there's a problem with it, if it's something that's not right, we still can be punished for our ignorance. David took that ark and they put it on a cart. And if you look, what did they do before the cart? They were doing the same thing they did the second time they brought it in. They were praising God. They were playing on all manner of instruments, fir wood, harps, psalteries, timbrels, cornets, cymbals. They were praising the Lord. So imagine this. This is one of those pictures you got to get in the Bible. When we read the Bible, sometimes we read the words and, yeah, I got it, and we go to the next thing. Stop at that verse and get that mental picture. They're moving this ark, praising the Lord. There's an entire orchestra, band, however you want to say it, going before this ark, and they're praising God, and this is the greatest thing in the world. We're bringing the ark of God back to where it should be, right? Except how are they doing it? The way the world did it. They were not doing it the way God told them to do it. And because of that ignorance, and I'm going to say, I honestly believe it was ignorance that they didn't pick it up and carry it. Nobody thought to look and read the rules again. Because, the high priest and his sons had died. There was sort of a break there, I think, a little bit. And they didn't realize, oh, wait a minute, we're doing this wrong. But God didn't cut them slack for that. Because they were his children. They were supposed to know. They had the book of the law. I mean, really, at this time, how many books of the Bible were written? They were supposed to know this. And they did it wrong. They did it in ignorance. God did not honor that worship. All that musical instruments, all that beautiful playing, God did not honor that. God didn't respect it. He touched the ark, he died. We need to remember that because we can be guilty of that pretty quick, right? That's one that we as Christians we don't spend enough time in the Word, and then we try to use ignorance as an excuse, and it's not. How about this one? Luke 18:10. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. We know the conclusion, right? One went down justified. One did not. God doesn't honor our worship when we worship in pride. This is another one. I sort of put these last two here at the end because I felt they really apply to us as Christians. I think they all do. But I think the last two really can get to us. Because, I'm going to church today. I had there's always a good story, right? A guy I was working with, we're driving to work one day, and we were throwing tapes in from a missions conference or a preaching conference. I forget what it even was. And we're driving through, and it was one of those, the guy starts out. He was an older preacher. You could tell by his voice. And he goes, "Isn't it great when we get up on Sunday morning and we get ready for church?" And he goes, "Guys, you put on your suit and your tie, and ladies, you get your best dress on, and we get all gussied up, and we get our Bibles, and we go out and get in our vehicle and start her up, and we're driving to church, and we know we're 100% doctrinally correct." And he just stopped and let it hang. And that's where he was going. Pride. Paul said he only knew in part, right? We don't know everything. Pastor just mentioned again when he talked about prophecy and teaching prophecy, the first thing you got to have is being ready to be humble when you look at it, because we don't know everything. But we can come before God and try to worship God with the attitude we know everything that's in this book. We are better than every other church. We are super Christians compared to everybody else. When we start to think more highly of ourselves than we ought, we're worshiping in pride. And God does not accept that worship, because when we're in pride, who are we really worshiping? Ourselves, right? When you sort of back through the list, when we're ignorant of what God tells us to do, why? He's given us his book, right? When we walk in and we decide we're going to worship God, and God's lucky to have me because I'm so-and-so, why? The only reason you are who you are is because God made you that. God gave you those abilities. God let you have that position, that power, that authority. You shouldn't be thinking anything important about yourself in that. When we come and we say, "You know what, God, I'm going to worship you this way, because this is the way I think you should be worshiped." Pastor just spent a whole series going over worship. I don't think I need to follow that up with much. If you have any questions, you can go back and watch. And he talked about what worship is and how it should be done. We don't get to really do that in our own style and say, "Well, God, I'm just going to do this." He gave us some rules. We need to follow them, right? I wanted to finish up with just this thought. It says in John 4:23, it says, "But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him." I wanted to go to that word truth, right? We said I started out talking about truth. And what is truth? Right? Remember who said that in the Bible? Yeah. Pilate, right? Looked at Jesus and said, "What is truth?" What had Jesus said in John 14:6? Jesus said unto him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." So when we come before God to worship, we have to worship him in his truth, not our truth. When the world starts telling us we have our own truth, it's a lie. There is only one truth, and it's Jesus Christ. And we need to worship him according to that truth. That was all I got. But thank you for letting me